All right, let's get right into it. We're about to tackle a really complex but absolutely crucial part of American history. Right from the very beginning, America has had this deep, painful contradiction at its core. It's a nation that was founded on this amazing idea of liberty, but at the same time, its foundations were built on the brutal reality of human bondage. So today, we're going to trace that story, looking at it as a journey from enslavement toward a freedom that honestly is still a work in progress.
So where does this all start?
Well, our journey begins in 1619. A single ship lands in the Virginia colony, and what happens next sets in motion a tragic legacy. It forges the legal and social chains that would define America for centuries to come.
So when these first 20 and odd captive Africans were brought ashore, their status was, well, kind of murky. They were treated a lot like European indentured servants, people working off a debt. But here's the thing, that ambiguity, it didn't last long. The colony had this huge thirst for permanent, free labor, and the laws were about to shift in a really terrifying way. And this is the concept that changed everything, chattel slavery. We're not just talking about forced labor here. This was a whole legal system that reclassified human beings as property, as chattel, the same way you think of livestock. This was all backed up by a brutal set of laws called slave codes that stripped away every single human right. And the most crucial part, it was hereditary. It was passed down from mother to child, forever creating this permanent, inescapable prison of bondage. Let's just break this down, because the difference is huge. An indentured servant, they had a contract. They had an end date to their service, a promise of freedom, and at least some legal rights. A person trapped in chattel slavery, they had nothing. No contract, no rights, no end date. They were property for life, and so were their children and their children's children. It was this massive, uncrossable gap between temporary service and permanent dehumanization.
So you might be thinking this was just a Southern thing, right? But how did this system of human bondage grow to become the economic engine for the entire nation? How did it end up making the North just as wealthy as the South?
Well, in this year, a single invention basically poured gasoline on the fire. Eli Whitney's cotton gin completely changed the game. It could clean cotton 50 times faster than by hand. And what happens when something becomes way easier to produce? Demand just explodes. All of a sudden, the Southern economy is booming. And that whole boom was built on one thing: an absolutely insatiable demand for more enslaved labor. Now this is what's so important to understand. It just shatters the myth that slavery was only a Southern problem. Just follow the money, follow the path of the cotton. Yeah, it starts with enslaved people toiling on Southern plantations. Then what happens? Northern ships transporting, Northern textile mills processing, and Northern banks finance the entire grotesquely profitable operation. The whole country had its hands dirty. Now, you'd think that after the international slave trade was outlawed in 1808, things might slow down. But no. Instead, a massive, brutal internal market for human beings just exploded. That phrase we still sometimes use today, sold down the river, it comes directly from this horror. Enslaved people from the Upper South being sold to the absolute hell of the cotton and sugar plantations in the Deep South. It tore families apart, husbands from wives, mothers from children, with just unimaginable cruelty. But, and this is so important, even in the face of a system that was designed to crush every last bit of hope, the human spirit just refused to be broken. People fought back, constantly, in clever ways, in courageous ways. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. When the law, the economy, the entire government is set up to keep you in chains, what does fighting back even look like? Well, it turns out it looked like a million different things. From these quiet, daily acts of defiance to keep your own identity alive, all the way to organized, armed rebellions that sent shockwaves through the entire system. And we're talking about active resistance every single day. People held on to their humanity and their culture through music, through spirituals, through stories. They organized armed uprisings, like the famous one led by Nat Turner. And of course, they created one of the most incredible symbols of defiance in all of history, the Underground Railroad. This secret network of people and safe houses, all dedicated to one single goal: freedom. And at the heart of this resistance were these incredible leaders, many of whom had escaped slavery themselves. They became the most powerful voices in the abolition movement. People like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, they weren't just fighting for their own freedom, they were putting their lives on the line to tear the whole institution down. Let's just take Harriet Tubman as our guide for a moment. They called her a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She escaped slavery herself, but she didn't just stop there. No way.
She went back. She risked her life again and again, returning to the South, they estimate about 13 times, to guide dozens of other people on that dangerous, secret journey to the North. And then you got people like the incredible Frederick Douglass. He used a different kind of weapon, his own story. His autobiography was this powerful, brilliant takedown of slavery. It became an international bestseller, and it forced people all over the world who had tried to just look away to finally confront the brutal reality of the system. He literally challenged the conscience of the nation. Well, eventually, something had to give. The tension of being a nation that was half slave and half free, it just couldn't last. It finally hit a breaking point and exploded into the Civil War, a conflict that would not only split the country in two, but would completely redefine the meaning of freedom itself. Now, here's something that's really critical to understand. When the war started, President Lincoln's main goal wasn't to abolish slavery. You can see it right here in this quote from 1862. His #1 objective was just to save the Union, whatever it took. But the whole purpose of the war began to change. And you can actually see that shift happening right here. The relentless work of abolitionists, the strategic military need to weaken the South, and the incredible courage of enslaved people who were escaping to Union lines. All of it pushed the war toward a much higher purpose. It went from being a war just to save the Union to a war for liberation, and that led to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and finally the 13th Amendment in 1865. And what was the result? By the end of the war, 4 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. 4 million enslaved African Americans had gained their freedom. Legally, they went from being property to being people. It was a monumental, nation-changing moment. But here's the thing. Breaking the physical chains of slavery, that didn't automatically mean true freedom. Tragically, the end of the war wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. Those chains of history were still heavy. They just changed shape. After this brief, hopeful time called Reconstruction, new kinds of control popped up. Jim Crow laws, which were this whole system of rules for racial segregation, took over. Black citizens were systematically blocked from voting, and economic systems like sharecropping basically trapped countless families in a new cycle of debt and poverty that looked a lot like slavery itself. And that right there is why this history matters so much today. The legacy of those centuries of bondage isn't just some ancient history. Its echoes are all around us in American society. You can see it in the gaps in wealth, in housing, in education, in the justice system. To really get a grasp on the ongoing fight for civil rights, you first have to understand the journey that we've just talked about.
Which really leaves us with this one big question to think about. The actual physical chains of chattel slavery were broken more than 150 years ago, but the shadows they cast are incredibly long. Thinking about how those shadows still shape our world isn't just about understanding the past. It's about understanding the ongoing American journey toward liberty and justice for all.